On today's episode of SNHU Explains, we talk to Jacob Powers and Paul Witcover. Jacob is the Associate Dean of Creative Writing for the BA and MA programs, and Paul is the Associate Dean of the online MFA program here at SNHU. We talk everything from the value of a creative writing degree and what makes SNHUs unique to overcoming writer's block and when you know your story is finished. So stay tuned. All right, so we're going to start really easy. Can you both just introduce yourselves and your roles here at SNHU?
My name is Jacob Powers. I'm the Associate Dean of Creative Writing for the BA and MA programs here.
And I'm Paul Witcover. I'm the Associate Dean of the online MFA program.
Great. Well, it's great to meet you both. Today, we're talking about the creative writing program at SNHU, as well as a little bit of poetry. And to start off, what should a prospective student consider when looking at creative writing programs?
I would say how much time they have, for sure, especially with the master's programs. If they are someone who has a lot of time to be able to dedicate to the craft and that they want to, develop a fully developed novel, the online MFA is a better option, and I'll let Paul speak to that. But for those who might be balancing their workload with other obligations like full-time jobs, family, work, and everything, and they just they want to study writing, but they have to balance it with all that other work. An MA might be more appropriate. For the BA, I think it kind of echoes that sentiment and stuff, but of course, it's a little bit less intensive than the MA and online MFA programs.
Yeah, just to chime in on the online MFA. Actually, SNHU has two MFA programs. One is a low residency program. That's a little bit different in that it requires some actual presence on campus a few times every year, but the rest of it takes place more or less remotely. An online MFA is completely remote. And there's no requirement to be on campus for anything. So obviously, it's a better fit for students who are, have full-time jobs, family responsibilities that preclude them from taking 10 days off twice a year or however long it is. Nonetheless, it's still a robust program, and I think we give our students a great grounding in both the craft of writing and the publishing side of the equation, the business side. And I guess the other thing to mention is that the MFA is considered to be a terminal degree. So it qualifies you for teaching at the post-secondary level, teaching creative writing, that is, at that level. So a lot of students come in and they're interested in becoming a teacher of creative writing at a university or local college, and without substantial publication credits, an MA probably wouldn't be sufficient for that. You could probably teach at maybe a community college with an MA, but by and large, the MFA is required to teach above that. So that's the primary distinction between the MA and the MFA at SNHU. Both are great programs.
And one more thing to consider too, of course, is what you want to focus on with your writing. The BA and MA programs offer 4 concentrations: fiction, nonfiction, screenwriting, and poetry. While the online MFA offers fiction with 4 subgenres. And Paul, do you want to talk briefly about what those 4 are?
Yeah, our program is a popular fiction program. So the 4 genres that we cover are speculative fiction, romance, YA, and contemporary. Contemporary is kind of an umbrella categorization. A lot of things fall under that. For example, mystery would be considered a contemporary novel. A thriller, anything like that basically doesn't have components of the other 3 genres would fall into the category of contemporary. The other requirement for the MFA to graduate with the degree is to complete a novel. You have to write a 50,000 word novel.
Oh, wow.
So a lot of students come into the program and they report that they really like that because they kind of feel like, I'm not going to finish a novel unless I really have to do it. So, we kind of provide the support to do that, but it's also an expectation.
Wow. So yeah, my next question, which you both have pretty much answered here was what creative writing programs are offered at Southern New Hampshire University. But you summed all that up beautifully. So I'm going to move on to the next one. What would you say is unique about SNHU's creative writing program?
I would say, I mean, of course, as with any program at SNHU, the asynchronous learning component of it, we allow students to be able to work on their craft outside of the classroom on their own time. There are, of course, weekly deadlines that they need to meet, and those deadlines scaffold towards a final project so that by the end of whatever course they're taking at the end of the term, they have some sort of creative project or work or something related to creative writing that they're able to then usually leverage into a later course or work on further to kind of develop into a publishable materials. So that is kind of a nice aspect of it, especially again for our students who may be balancing, workload outside of the university as well.
Yeah, and I would add to that for the MFA, the caliber of faculty is very high. Our faculty are all published novelists working in one or more of the genres that we teach. So I think that is also a draw for our program, something that sets it apart from programs in which you may be learning about writing speculative fiction from an instructor who has never written a speculative fiction novel, may know a lot about it critically, but has never actually published one.
So kind of piggybacking off that a little bit, can you describe any special programs, events, or initiatives that enhance the student experience in SNHU's creative writing program?
Yes, we have several here that we are really proud of. I think the one that has been ongoing for several years at this point is the Word for Word reading series, where every year we invite published authors and faculty from the program, as well as winners of the Penman Review Fall Fiction Contest and exceptional students from the program to read and share their work and discuss the craft of creative writing. We also have every year a panel of professionals from the industry, whether they're editors, publishers, agents, to kind of discuss that aspect of the creative writing program as well. So that is ongoing. This year we had some phenomenal writers, Morgan Talty, Kelly Link, a couple of our faculty as well, Carla Sameth and Paul. Can you refresh my memory on your faculty?
Yeah, that was Stephanie Whiteovich.
Stephanie Whiteovich, poets who discuss their writing. And we've had, nonfiction faculty in the past, as well as fiction faculty talk about their writing and craft too. So Word for Word is definitely one that we like to promote. We also have the Penman Review, which is our literary journal. It's been going on for 10 years. We publish a lot of creative writers, not only from the program, but from outside of the university as well. And there's a lot of craft articles and stuff on the website as well that kind of discusses, all aspects of creative writing. And Paul also has a few initiatives under his belt that he also does too.
Yeah, I can mention a few. I mean, one I also want to mention that kind of falls under the aegis of Word for Word is twice each year we do a pitch weekend, where we bring in literary agents and graduating or recently graduated students from the MFA, online MFA, and the MA in creative writing are able to pitch their novels, their thesis novels, to literary agents. With some success, I might add. We've had some students achieve representation, and recently one of those students, Jessica Cozy, had her novel that was picked up by an agent at a pitch weekend, accepted for publication by Delacorte. So, yeah, that's, and then like Jacob mentioned, the MFA does have its own kind of programs, extracurricular events that are useful to students in the program. Wireside Chat is a monthly event that takes place in teams, featuring, instructors from the MFA program talking about their writing journeys, recent publications, answering questions from students about craft and the business of writing. Once every term, we have kind of an open mic event where students can come and read from work in progress. Every week, I have something called Tea with the Dean. It's like a half-hour event where open to all MFA students, where they can just show up and we talk about a particular short story from a craft perspective.
One other thing another initiative that happens is actually a student-driven initiative. There's the Creative Writing Club that is on SNHU Connect that is going strong for several years at this point. There's quite a community there where writers share their ongoing work, news about successes, as well as news about potential, guideline or contests, submission guidelines, and so on and so forth.
Yeah, and that reminded me of another one as well. The MFA has its own writers community. It's kind of a social media analog that takes place within the SNHU Pulse. SNHU Connect. Mm-hmm. Takes place within SNHU Connect. Yep. And that's become kind of a clearinghouse of information when there's openings for submissions to anthologies, jobs in the creative writing field or the publishing field. It's visited by students and by instructors alike. So it's become a very useful clearinghouse for that sort of thing.
I think some of these too, Wireside chats and Word for Word, are available to see on our YouTube channel as well. I think we published some of those. So people listening can actually go check those out.
Yes.
Yep.
So these questions have kind of been answered already, but just to reiterate, what can a student expect to learn in a creative writing course?
So that's also going to vary by program. With a BA, it starts off with the introduction to creative writing. So it's really tailored to those who want to test out their creative writing skills or kind of learn more about it. It's also a good program for those who have already been writing for quite some time to learn the basics of any element of writing related to the concentration. So, fiction, it will be character, plot, setting. Poetry will be different forms of poems. Screenwriting will be script formatting and how to effectively write dialogue. Nonfiction is how to write your own personal story. So the BA is getting the basic building blocks there. And by the end of the program, you usually have about 35 to 40 pages of work that you're able to either submit to literary journals if they're shorter works, or at least have a head start on a larger project that you can carry through in the MA or online MFA. The MA program is more intensive than the BA. It covers some of the same materials and stuff, but with more depth. And the outcome or expectation from that is to write 35 to 40,000 words for fiction and nonfiction, a full script for screenwriting, and a chapbook of poetry for the Poetry MA program. And then the online MFA, as Paul mentioned, is slightly different. So,
yeah, for the online MFA, I mean, what you're going to learn is if you're writing in a particular genre, let's just say speculative fiction, you'll learn a lot more about the history, the craft that's involved with writing in that particular genre, because often each genre will have its own expectations, its own recurring tropes and themes, and especially in terms of like publishing, publishers will be looking for specific things from each of those genres, and that's very true in a genre like romance, for example. So entering the program will give you much more insight into what those expectations are, and you will learn via craft instruction how best to meet those expectations in a way that serves your story. As I mentioned earlier, completing a novel of at least 50,000 words is part of the expectations to earn the degree. So you will learn a lot about like how to write a novel. Just doing it and being able to leave the program with a novel under your belt is a huge accomplishment that most aspiring writers never finish a novel. So I think just coming out of the program with the knowledge like, wow, I can actually do this. I've done it once. I can do it again. That's a big deal, I think.
And you can also, I think in both programs too, you learn about the industry a lot too. Not only about the genres and everything related to that and how to write out a longer work, but about the publication process, the different avenues to explore, such as self-publication or traditional publication, how to write query letters, how to seek representation, things to expect along those lines as well. Kind of prepares the student for their writing after graduation.
So it almost combines the business side with the creative side then.
Yeah, and in the online MFA, I mean, we really have tried to do that. Our program is kind of has two parallel tracks, one of which is on the craft side, one of which is on the business side, because not only do we feel that writers benefit from knowing as much as possible about the writing biz and the publishing business, but also a lot of writers want to or decide to supplement their writing income by going into that business. They want to have a job in publishing. They want to be a freelance editor. They decide that they want to become a freelance agency. We've had a few students that become publishers themselves. They create a small press. So providing students with information and experience in those areas is also part of our mission.
I'm just curious too, on the instructor side for you guys, what it's like in the teaching in the MFA program, having to read all those novels at the end of a term.
It's a joy. No, I mean, seriously, it is a joy, but I mean, it's a lot to read, right? There's no getting around that. And we build that into the program. So, instructors are not rushing through these novels. Every novel is not, people are not turning in 150,000, 200,000 word novels. Most of them are probably 50,000 to 80,000 words. And that's manageable. In our thesis courses, a cohort of students stays with the same instructor through the 3 courses of the thesis. And consequently, the instructor is very knowledgeable already by the time the final thesis course rolls around and the novel is turned in. They've been with that student through three terms already. So they're very well versed in everything in the novel, and they're able to offer, insightful, significant guidance and feedback to the writer, with the idea being that at the end of the program, you've turned in your completed novel and all of the other things that are required. You're still going to get one more editorial letter back from your instructor. And this will be exactly that, an editorial letter. It won't be your professor grading you. It will be a fellow writer with experience in the business telling you, this is what you need to do on your final pass to secure representation or to, have a good shot at having your book picked up by a publisher.
Yeah, I think SNHU does a great job. I was in the Master's in History program here, and it's not creative writing, but it is a ton of writing. And they did a great job of kind of taking it step by step, because the thesis at the end had to be 70 to 100 pages, but that process did start like 3 courses before it was due. So I think that's one thing that's super beneficial. And speaking of that, in general, how are online writing courses beneficial?
I would go back again to the pacing. Our workshops, and I think this is true for all of the programs, is that, you start off, and then in each subsequent workshop, you kind of build on what it is that you're focusing on and what you'd like to achieve. So because of the scaffolding, it makes it a little bit easier to balance your writing passion or work, or your writing life with your other life, your work life, your family life, all those other aspects that are kind of competing with it. So, it's not to say that the classes aren't intensive. They are to the students' benefit, to make sure that they're able to, write good quality material that is hopefully up to be publishable material by the time they graduate. But it's a lot less, having to carve out time to drive to a campus, sit in a classroom, and in a lot of cases have much more materials due every week. And sometimes those materials not necessarily scaffolding off of one another. So there's less of a build on the project as you go along.
Yeah, one big thing too, I think, in as a fellow creative, collaboration is really important. And it sounds like you've kind of summed this up already, but how do you foster a supportive and collaborative writing community among online students and faculty?
We follow in all of the workshops, we follow we do a writing workshop for all of the creative writing concentrations and stuff. It is, I would say there's a large part of it which is kind of follows the Iowa Writers Workshop, which is that students submit their work and then peers review the work and offer feedback on how the student can improve the writing as they revise it. A difference between that we're striving to obtain in all of the programs is that we want students to be able to give a synopsis of their work or what they're hoping to achieve in their work, because especially with the BA and MA programs, we have students who are writing in all genres within the same classroom. So you might have like a literary fiction writer in the same classroom as a romance writer, and the same classroom as a sci-fi writer, in the same classroom as a fantasy writer. And because of that, the Iowa Writers Workshop can be a little bit more challenging to implement, because in that workshop, the writer is not allowed to speak, and they're not allowed to kind of talk about their writing. The writing is supposed to speak for themselves. And of course, because there are different people reading different things or with different backgrounds in those classrooms, we want to be able to help students kind of share what they're working on with their peers and what they would like help on, so that the peers can kind of keep that in mind as they're workshopping the piece, so that it's not so silencing for those who are trying to achieve their goals.
On top of that, what role does diversity, equity, and inclusion play in SNHU's creative writing program?
Plays a large role. We are committed to having a diversity of viewpoints available to students when it comes to resources, textbooks, readings that they're assigned. The diversity of our student body is a strength. Jacob mentioned earlier the benefits of having feedback from different people who are writing in one genre, bringing insights to a piece that may be written in another. But that goes for people from diverse viewpoints, diverse cultures, diverse, racial backgrounds. I think having all of that in the mix really, strengthens the program and gives students a wider perspective on their own writing and the writing of others as well.
We strive very hard to include a variety of voices throughout all of the programs, and we encourage students. Not only do we share these voices in readings and articles and craft suggestions and everything, but a lot of students or a lot of classrooms ask students to kind of create their own reading lists as well as they go through the program. And we strive very hard to encourage them to read diversely, to gain new perspectives on the craft, to understand what's happening in the industry, and in a way to perhaps influence their own writing. And that's not only, the diversity of different backgrounds, socioeconomically, racially, gender, everything like that, but also the concentrations themselves. Encouraging students who are in fiction to perhaps read more poetry to read more screenwriting, and so on and so forth, because we like to emphasize that the genres and subgenres, such as speculative fiction and romance fiction, can of course blend together and actually create really unique pieces of writing that stand out in the industry and might be really a selling point for different publishers and agencies.
Yeah, and that's got to be one big advantage of an online program as well. It's you have people from all around the country bringing their unique background to the course and
yes,
their unique interests as well. And how do you support students in finding their unique voice and developing their creative identity as writers?
So again, the program is open to many genres of creative writing, which is unique in itself, because there are a lot of creative writing programs in the country are very much focused on literary fiction, which, of course is foundational and very important in the industry and in literature in general. But in a lot of ways, and I witnessed this, in my BA and MA program or MFA program when I was pursuing them, that those who are writing outside of the literary fiction genre are usually put in the corner, or they're not discussed as seriously as literary fiction, but they're just as important for their particular genre. And I think in that way, we really strive to encourage students to explore what genre they're interested in most, and develop the style and voice and genre expectations that are required of that particular focus that they want, the way they want to focus on and stuff. So I think that really makes the programs unique too. We're not saying come in here and write literary fiction, write literary memoirs, screenplays that are going to win Oscars, things like that. You can come in and write what you want to write, and we want to encourage that because we want them to explore what they're most passionate about.
That's great. And just to sum up this section about SNHU in general, what's the benefit of going to a master's in creative writing after earning a bachelor's degree?
More time to work on your craft, for sure. The BA, after the BA, when you're done, you have, at most 40 pages worth of material that you have. That of course is a good starting point, especially if you have multiple shorter works to submit to literary journals and stuff like that. But the MA is going to give you a lot more time to practice the craft and to learn how to balance the craft with your life outside of writing. And yeah, I would say that's the big thing. It's just more opportunities to practice writing, more opportunities to polish work, to engage in the workshop process. And Paul may have additional insights as well.
Yeah, I mean, the one other thing that, excuse me, that occurs to me is, like, if you're taking creative writing on a BA level, I feel like it's a real mix. You have students in there who've been writing for many, many years, super dedicated to their craft. But you also have writers who are like, hey, I like science fiction, or I like writing this or that. I'm going to try it out. They don't necessarily have the expectation that they're going to make a career out of it. When you get to the master's level, you're in there with people who are really serious about writing. They've thought about it a lot. They've done it a lot. So the caliber of the experience kind of goes up. It's more intensive, it's harder, but it's also more rewarding in the sense that you're going to, your own writing is probably going to grow exponentially over the course of that program in a way that it just didn't if you took a BA in creative writing.
What are the different genres in creative writing? So how does a writer determine where they best fit within those genres? So kind of a two-part question.
There are a ton of genres in creative writing. Not only, of course, the concentrations that we offer, like fiction, nonfiction, poetry, and screenwriting, but there are genres within those genres. From literary fiction, romance, science fiction, high fantasy, low fantasy, and then there are subgenres within those genres as well. So there's a lot to explore. And where a writer determines where they best fit within those genres, I think, is what they read and what they're drawn to and what they're kind of passionate about. That is kind of the way in which you discover what you'd like to write in general.
And do you have any advice on developing characters and settings? I wrote a few screenplays in college. I was a film major, and it was always hard to I had the beginning and the end, but I never had the middle. Like, do you have any advice on that?
I think Vonnegut said it really well. Kurt Vonnegut is just, you want to make sure your character wants something or needs something, even if it's just a glass of water, there needs to be some sort of reason why the character is struggling. What is it that they're struggling with, and what is it that they're trying to find balance in their struggle with? And will they be able to achieve that? That's really important for character development, I think. Setting wise, I mean, Paul has had quite a few works published and stuff. So what are your thoughts on how to develop setting appropriately?
I mean, it all depends on the individual writer. You know, there are many different prescriptions. There are exercises that you can do. You know, my personal writing occurs in the speculative fiction space, where world building is super important, and obviously world building is part of setting, or setting is part of world building. But honestly, I feel like it's something every writer has to find their own way towards. And the way that they do in our program is simply by, you know, through the workshop process. What's working, what's not working. What, you know, you submit something in a workshop, and a fellow student may say, I couldn't visualize anything that was happening. I got confused by the action because there wasn't enough context for me to place those actions in any kind of sequence. And that, you know, that's a good thing to know, right? About your own writing. Oh, maybe I need to slow down and provide more stage direction, so to speak, so that, you know, readers can follow what my characters are doing.
So because of that collaboration that's in classes, tell me a bit about the mindset a writer needs to embrace constructive criticism and feedback. I work with a lot of creatives. I think sometimes we're a little bit sensitive about our own work. So how do we take that in without getting, I guess, angry would be the word?
Yeah, I think you have to set your ego aside. I mean, you have to detach as much as possible from your own work. Obviously, you don't cut loose from it entirely, and you want to bring your ego back into the equation at some point, you know, when you're doing your revisions and deciding what to accept and not to accept. But when it comes time to hearing feedback, I think you have to just be humble and you know, check your ego at the door, basically.
You have to breathe through it, and you have to figure out, you know, what if my audience isn't understanding what it is that I'm trying to project or trying to convey, then perhaps, you know, like Paul said, I need to put my ego aside and figure out how can I work or strive towards making that clear for my audience so that they are invested in what I'm trying to share. It's easier said than done. Don't be sensitive. I mean, that's the key, is like, you know, remember ultimately, especially, I mean, and we teach our students this, and it takes practice, of course, in some ways, but your peers are not critiquing you. They're critiquing the story. And the story is its own entity apart from you. When you write it, you're creating a life and putting it out there into the world. So it's important to kind of have that disconnect in a way, to allow that life to breathe on its own, and then to try to figure out how can I make that life, you know, stronger and more robust, and be able to sustain all of these other things that may be impacting it. If you kind of keep that in mind, that distance and stuff, it can be really helpful.
Yeah, you mentioned that workshop where the writer can't speak, right? That's got to be difficult.
It is, and I think that's one of the things that we are really striving to kind of adapt to the online setting, especially because in a face-to-face classroom, when you're in a workshop setting, you can, you know, convey an idea like, this is what I thought of this particular story, and you see the writer in that classroom, and the writer might go, or they might make a facial expression or something, which makes you think, oh, maybe I misinterpreted that, or maybe that's not quite what they wanted. So how can I repurpose my comment to help them along the way? Online, that's not an option, right? The workshops are not live, they're asynchronous. So we like to encourage writers to, again, take that step back, listen to what the feedback is. And if there's something that they have a question about, follow up with their peers, or, you know, even share like, okay, well, this was what my intention was. How do you think I should, you know, pursue it in this particular way or another? And of course, that is something that they can also share with their instructors when they're uploading their work for review as well. It's like, there was some struggle in the workshops with this. I'm wondering if this is something that I was able to accomplish. Can you let me know and stuff? I think that that's really important, especially for asynchronous learning, where you're not able to see, your fellow writer in face to face.
So how do you know when a piece of writing is finished?
I said this to one of my fellow deans earlier today. I shared this question with him, and he said, the end. It says the end. And I thought, yeah, that's about it. I mean, like that is a hard question to answer. I would defer this again to Paul. And if he knows the answer, I mean, if he's able to beautifully wrap it up, I would be just in awe. But I think it varies per person and writer, to be honest with you.
I mean, I know what works for me, and what I tell the writers that I work with is, like, when you start to make it worse, it's done.
That's good advice.
As you're going through the revision process.
What tips do you have for overcoming writer's block?
There are so many. I'm impressed, like, how many writer's block resources there are out there now. I mean, you go to any of your local bookstore, or even national chains and stuff. There's always going to be a couple of books that are like 1,001 prompts on how to overcome writer's block. I mean, 1,001 prompts, that's got, that's at least as close to 3 years worth of options if you're doing it once a day and everything like that. But beyond that, I think the most important thing that I can recommend is walking away. Find other things that you want, that you have a passion for, and do those as well. Getting that space can kind of help you overcome that writer's block. Go for a walk, eavesdrop on what other people are saying at the coffee shop. I might give you an idea of what to write later on. Practice an instrument, watch a movie, do something that is outside of just sitting in front of the screen staring at a blank document.
Yeah, I agree with that completely. I feel like a lot of times, writers experience writer's block as something bad. It's like, and it almost as a failure, right? I'm not a creative person. Why can't I come up with a new idea? But all this stuff is taking place deep inside. It's all percolating. It might not be ready to emerge yet. So you have to be patient and give it that time. So, practicing what Jacob is suggesting there, I think, is a great way to do that, because you're heeding the message of your writer's block, which is, you're not ready right now. We're still working some stuff out. Come back later. Reply hazy. Try again.
Yeah, that's great advice. Sometimes you can just be too close to something, and just walking away can be helpful. Yeah, this is totally opposite of this, but I've been considering starting the Way of Kings, the Brandon Sanderson thing, and I was like, this guy has the opposite of writer's block. Like, how does he have so many words in his head? I just want to ask you guys, what role do you think poetry plays in society?
I think poetry is an especially important genre of writing, because it's able to get to the core of human emotion and experience in a way that can sometimes take a novelist 900 pages to get to. Or that, like, you need to have a trilogy of a trilogy of films to kind of get to the point and stuff. And poetry is able to, evoke imagery and, feelings and just tap deep into what it means to be a human and what it means to, experience this life in the way that it is. And, the fact that, there's thousands of years of poetry to explore, and that there are so many different styles and forms. It's something that I think a lot of people often say when they say I don't like to read, or I don't like to read poetry, especially. I think it's because they look at the sonnets of Shakespeare and think that all poetry is exactly like this, and I have to break my brain trying to figure out what they're saying. That's not necessarily the case. There are a lot of poems out there that are quite easy to follow and stuff. It's just that you have to read broadly, just like any genre of writing. You have to kind of find what speaks to you more than other poems. It's just like any other, like you had mentioned Brandon Sanderson recently and how prolific of a writer he is. On the literary side of things, Joyce Carol Oates is like that, where people are aggravated at how much she writes and is able to get stuff published and stuff. And yet, different people are going to be interested in those different types of writers. And I think that resonates true for poetry as well.
Yeah, I would add, I think it's important or can be very useful for fiction writers to read a lot of poetry, because the way that poets approach language is very different than the way that fiction writers do. And I think the creativity of it can sometimes break log jams in fiction writers' minds about like what language can really do.
And that could be true for other genres too. I mean, you would get quite experimental, I think, with screenwriting if you're writing in poetic form. But it's not unheard of, and it is something that you could definitely explore. But I'm thinking of nonfiction as well. Paul had mentioned fiction. I had just read the memoir Solido, and the author for that is actually a poet by trade. But so when you're reading the memoir, it has a lot of poetic elements in it. There's a lot that resonates, and it makes it it reads much differently from, the traditional memoir that you would explore and stuff. And again, that is something that can put yourself out there in the industry to say, I have something unique to share, and kind of carve your way into the industry in a way, rather than just like rehashing the same memoir over and over again. You're being inspired by other genres and concentrations to develop what you want to write.
I don't know if you've seen online, they do Letterboxd, that website for movies will do, name your top 3 movies. And I know this is really hard, but can you each name your top 3 favorite, novels? We'll do novels.
Novels. Ooh, that's challenging. I would say recently, I really loved The Overstory by Richard Powers. I thought that was an incredibly moving piece. I think he did an excellent job just weaving in. I mean, it made you really appreciate trees. I'll say that. It did an amazing job of that. The Overstory definitely sticks out for me. The thing that got me started in this whole, because like in high school, it was like, read the Scarlet Letter. And I'm sure if I go back to the Scarlet Letter now, I would be just floored by it. Nathaniel Hawthorne's short stories are excellent and stuff. But like when you're in high school and you're just trying to get through it, the last thing you want to read is the Scarlet Letter. And I thought, why is writing exist? Why does it exist? And one of my good friends at that time told me, you should check out Kurt Vonnegut. And I read Slaughterhouse-Five, and that just blew my mind. I'm like, wow, look at what you can do with writing. So I would say Slaughterhouse-Five is another one. And a third novel that I've really appreciated. Again, it's a real struggle to try to figure this out because there are so many. I would say, actually, I really enjoy short stories and reading those. I would say another one that really resonated with me for years is Tobias Wolff's Bullet in the Brain, which I think you can find online relatively easily and stuff. I think that kind of like Vonnegut with short stories, at least, Tobias Wolff is able to show like how you can craft an entire narrative from a single moment. Where a man is shot during a bank robbery, and just create such profound depth in the character that resonates and just leaves you floored by the end of its conclusion.
Actually, Vonnegut has some great short stories as well that I've read. A few of them came out after he died. I think While Mortals Sleep and Look at the Bird.
Yes.
Those 2 books. Yeah, they were great.
He's had a lot of great success after his death as well, I guess. But yeah, Harrison Bergman is another great one that's from him too. But I'm curious, Paul, I'm curious what yours are, because
thanks for going first. It gave
you some time to figure them out.
Yeah, exactly. I'm going to kind of go a little bit old school. And just talk about like 3 novels that were sort of important to me as a writer. The first would Lord of the Rings. I'm a speculative fiction writer. That was a book that just blew my mind when I was a kid because of the depth of the world building in it and because of just how effortless it all seemed. That was a huge influence on me. And it wasn't until later that I began to appreciate that Tolkien was actually a pretty good writer as well, just on a craft level. Then I would say Little Big, which is a novel by John Crowley, which is also a fantasy. It's kind of an urban fantasy. That was a novel that opened my eyes to the way in which there were other pathways available in fantasy than that which had been sort of blazed by Tolkien. After Tolkien's book came out and became such a huge publishing phenomenon, it kind of spawned a genre unto itself of Tolkien imitators, and we've all seen those books on the shelves of bookstores everywhere. This was a book that seemed to have been spawned from a different. Its evolutionary pathway was different. Tolkien wasn't in there. It came from some other route of fantasy, which I later discovered was books like Blood in the Mist by Hope Merleys is a good example of a kind of a forgotten fantasy that was forgotten by everybody except John Crowley. And then most recently, Jonathan Strange and Mr. Norrell, which is another fantasy book that came out, 10 or 15 years ago. I think of it as new somehow. But that showed me yet another way in which fantasy could be reinvented and made relevant, even though it's like a kind of a historical novel that's set back in the 19th century. It still feels new because it's approaching, the kind of time-worn tropes of fantasy in a refreshingly new and interesting way. So, there's always, and the reader that we had last week, actually, Kelly Link, is someone who continually reinvents the tropes of fantasy fairy tales and shows why they've still got a lot of juice left in them.
I think if I sat with this question for a while, I would probably just change them constantly, to be honest with you. And there are also a lot of instances, too, where it's like I can't just pick a particular story or novel, but writers as well that have just been really influential or who have really just, stood out for me and stuff. So, yeah, that's a tough question. That was the toughest question out of all of them, I think.
Yeah, it's a very hard question. It's funny because Vonnegut and Lord of the Rings are like two of my favorite things. So this has been a good interview. But that's all the questions I had. This has been a great interview. I love reading and writing. I love screenwriting. So this is awesome for me. But thank you both for coming on. And
thank you.